We are now going to create the front window shutter. This piece of geometry right here. There are a couple of ways we could do this. We could use the existing geometry and extract it like we have been for the windows, for the doors. But instead we're going to use a simple plane. So create a plane and let's position it in front of where this window shutter is going to be created. Going to set subdivision width and height to 1. And let's go ahead and rotate this plane to correct orientation. First, we need to rotate on z-axis 90 degrees. Then I'm going to set width to 300. And right now this is a random value to determine the width of the window shutter. And you can see that it's changing the height. So we need to rotate this plane 90 degrees on Y. So this way we can set width and height and it will change correctly. And now let's set height to 150. Again, this is a random value to what I think the height is at the moment, but we're going to need to update these values. Let's modify the pivot point to be in the bottom left corner. And then we're going to snap this plane into position by holding down V, middle mouse click and drag, right into the corner where the window shutter is going to go. We also want to freeze transformations, so we zero out our translations. And the height of this plane doesn't reach all the way up. So let's go ahead and adjust our height to 155. Anytime we adjust the input for width, height, or depth, we'll need to remodify a pivot point. So let's go ahead and quickly move it back down to the bottom vertex and we snap it back into position. And it's still overlapping a little bit. So we're actually going to modify the top vertices manually. So I'm going to go into vertex component mode, select the top 2 vertices, hold V, and then middle mouse click and drag so they're snapped to the bottom of this border. Now let's go ahead and rotate this plane so it fits into position for the window shutter. We're going to use the exact same value that we used for our windows and AC units, which is 35.707. And we're going to rotate this on Y. Make sure you freeze transformations, otherwise you might have some random values under your rotate. So this is why we freeze transformations so they're reset back to 0. We need to adjust the width of this plane so it covers the entire window. Let's change width to 350 and we're going to need to modify the pivot point to be in the bottom corner vertex again. Then let's snap it back into position and still not quite enough. So let's change width to 390. Modify the pivot point again, then snap the plane into position. And that is close enough. We'll be able to adjust it more accurately so there's the same distance on each side when we're done with the window shutter. So we're going to keep this right now as is. We're going to reset the rotation back to 0 so this plane is straight because we need to model our detail and we're not going to do it when it's rotated at an angle into position. It will just make our job more difficult. Once we have it straight, let's go ahead and freeze transformations. We are now ready to model in the shutter detail. So select the plane and under inputs, go to subdivision width and type in 26. This will add 26 edges across our plane. And this is what we're going to use to create the extra detail. Now the number 26 I got from trial and error working on a similar object before. So I had to try a few values in order to get to number 26. And for this building, 26 looked correct. So I didn't want you to sit through this and have me try different values and spend all that time. Just know that I did have to test a few of these shutters and try out different widths to see what looked correct. Let's press Ctrl 1 to isolate select and go into Insert Edge Loop Tool options. We want to set multiple edge loops and use number of edge loops to 2. Then insert these 2 edge loops right in the middle here. Make sure these 2 edges are selected and then just pull them out to create the first shutter. Let's go to top view and scale these 2 edges to be a bit closer together. This will create a bit sharper, rounded corner. This looks a bit better and more like a real shutter. So this way it has more of a bit tighter, rounded edge. So now we have one shutter created and I like how it looks. The issue becomes is that we need to repeat the same exact step for the other 25 faces. Inserting two edges, pulling them out, and then scaling them, trying to match the shutter before. This would take way too long, and there is a better and a faster way to do this. We already have our single shutter created. So let's go ahead and delete all the other faces, and then we're going to use the single shutter and duplicate it 25 more times to create our full window shutter. Make sure the pivot point is at a bottom corner vertex. Then let's quickly adjust the front two edges by pulling them out a little bit more. Then we want to set these two edges to a soft edge. So select them, hold Shift, right click hold, and choose Soften Edge. And then the rest of the edges are going to be a hard edge. Let's enable the display of hard and soft edges by holding down Shift, right click hold, go to Soften Hardened Edges, and choose Toggle Soft Edge Display. Soft edges will be shown with a dashed line, and hard edges will be shown with a solid line. Now let's go ahead and duplicate this single shutter to create the full window shutter. Select it, then press Shift D. This will duplicate with Translate. The single shutter will be duplicated, then hold V, left click drag so it snaps to a corner vertex, right next to the first shutter. And now with this shutter still selected, and it's very important that you do not deselect. Press Shift D again, and it will be duplicated and moved over the exact amount of space that we moved the second shutter. And then continue to press Shift D until you have 26 of these window shutters. Select them all, hold Shift, right click hold, and choose Combine. They are now one single object. We have overlapping vertices that we need to merge where these shutters meet. So let's go to Top View, Vertex Component Mode, and select all of the inner vertices. We have 100 vertices. Let's go ahead and merge them. And now they're down to 50. Let's modify the pivot point to be in the bottom left corner, snapped to a vertex. And then let's rotate on Y 35.707 right into position. We need to make a few adjustments by moving and scaling this window shutter. To do this, we want to change to Object Component Mode instead of World. So select the shutter, hold Control and Shift, then right click hold and choose Object. Now let's move the shutter over a little bit so it's positioned more in the middle of the window frame, and then go to Top View and Scale so the front edges are a bit closer to the border. I don't want them to overlap and extend beyond this border, so make sure you just get them close enough to the front edge. Let's disable wireframe unshaded and take a look. And it's looking good. One final adjustment we need to make is the top vertices. Currently they are overlapping with the top border. So select all the top vertices of the window shutter and we're going to move them down. I'm going to change the grid spacing to 1 so we can align them to the bottom. And because we keep everything on the grid, even at 1 grid spacing, we're able to align those vertices right on the grid and to the bottom of the border. I'm going to reset grid spacing back to 10. Now let's delete the history and freeze transformations. So before I freeze transformations, I'm going to reset rotate back to 0, freeze transformations, and set rotate back to 35.707. We are now done with the front window shutter.